Right now, as you watch this, your brain is being hijacked. Not by a virus, not by a drug, by something far more ancient and far more effective. Fear is the oldest tool of control ever invented by those in power. And the terrifying part, you don't even know it's happening. Every headline you read, every emergency broadcast, every political speech designed to make your heart race, they all serve the same purpose: to shut down the part of your brain that thinks critically and activate the part that simply obeys. Fear, control, obey. Today, we're going to dismantle the psychology of terror piece by piece. You'll understand how fear rewires your neurology, why governments have weaponized it for centuries, and most importantly, how to reclaim your mind from its grip. As Noam Chomsky once observed, the general population doesn't know what's happening, and it doesn't even know that it doesn't know. By the end of this video, you will know, and once you know, they lose their power over you. The fear circuit. Before we talk about who's pulling the strings, you need to understand the machine they're pulling. Your amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, is your fear center. It evolved millions of years ago to keep you alive. When a predator appeared, your amygdala hijacked your entire nervous system. Heart rate spikes, pupils dilate, blood rushes to your muscles. Survival. Critical thinking, gone. Rational analysis, offline. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, planning, and reasoning, literally shuts down during a fear response. This is called amygdala hijack, a term coined by psychologist Daniel Goleman. When you are afraid, your thinking brain goes dark. And here's what makes this devastating. In the modern world, the threats aren't real predators, they're manufactured ones. News alerts, terror warnings, economic collapse predictions. Your amygdala can't tell the difference between a lion and a headline. It responds the same way, by shutting down your ability to think. Fear defeats more people than any other one thing in the world. And that biological vulnerability, it's exactly what makes you controllable. But this leads us to something far more disturbing, because this isn't accidental. Manufactured panic. What if the threats you're reacting to were carefully designed? In 1928, Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, wrote a book called Propaganda. In it, he laid out exactly how to manipulate public emotion to control behavior. He called it the engineering of consent. Bernays understood that if you could trigger someone's fear response, you could bypass their rational mind entirely, and governments took notice. During the Cold War, the United States government ran constant nuclear drills in schools. Children were taught to duck and cover under their desks. Was a wooden desk going to protect anyone from a nuclear blast? Of course not, but that wasn't the point. The point was to keep fear constant, to keep people in a perpetual state of survival mode. Because a population in survival mode doesn't question authority, it craves it. Panic, obey, repeat. They don't ask why we're building more weapons, they beg for more protection. As Hermann Goring chillingly admitted, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked. This pattern hasn't changed, it's only gotten more sophisticated. And that sophistication brings us to the most powerful fear machine ever created. The Fear Factory. Turn on the news right now. Count how many stories are designed to frighten you. Crime, war, disease, economic collapse, terrorism. Studies show that negative news stories outnumber positive ones by a ratio of 17-1. The news doesn't inform you, it programs you to be afraid. This isn't journalism, it's psychological warfare. Neuroscientist Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research at Stanford demonstrated something crucial. Chronic exposure to stress-inducing media elevates cortisol levels permanently. Your body stays in a low-grade fight-or-flight state. You can't sleep properly. You can't think clearly. You become anxious, reactive, and compliant. If this is making you rethink what you consume every day, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. There's so much more to uncover. Watch, fear, consume, obey. The business model of modern media is built on your amygdala. Fear generates clicks. Clicks generate revenue. Revenue demands more fear. It's a perfect loop, and you're the product. As media theorist Marshall McLuhan warned decades ago, the medium is the message. The medium isn't just delivering fear. The medium is fear. But what happens when fear goes beyond media and enters your social reality? Tribal terror. Here's where fear becomes truly sinister. It doesn't just make you afraid of external threats, it makes you afraid of each other. This is called outgroup derangement, and it's one of the most well-documented phenomena in social psychology. Division. Psychologist Henry Tajfel's minimal group experiments in the 1970s proved something disturbing. You can take random strangers, divide them into arbitrary groups, and within minutes they'll start discriminating against the other group. Now imagine what happens when political leaders spend years telling you that the other side isn't just wrong. They're dangerous. They're a threat to your children, your values, your survival. Your neighbor becomes your enemy overnight. Fear of the other is the most ancient form of social control. Every authoritarian regime in history has used it. Create an enemy, amplify the threat, unite the population against the manufactured danger. 1. Create an enemy. 2. Amplify the threat. 3. Unite through fear. 4. Consolidate power. As philosopher Hannah Arendt observed after studying totalitarianism, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. And that distinction dissolves fastest when people are afraid. But this manipulation goes even deeper than politics. It reaches into your very identity. Invisible chains. The most effective prison is one you don't know you're in. Philosopher Mitchell Foucault described this with his concept of the panopticon, a prison designed so that inmates could be watched at any time, but never knew when they were actually being observed. The prisoner becomes their own guard when fear is constant. The result, prisoners began policing themselves. They internalized the surveillance. They became their own jailers. Sound familiar? Think about how you censor yourself online, how you hesitate before speaking your mind at work, how you conform to expectations not because you agree, but because you're afraid of the consequences. Self-censorship is obedience. This is what psychologists call anticipatory compliance. You don't need to be punished. You just need to believe punishment is possible. Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments showed that people will deny what their own eyes see rather than disagree with the group. Under fear of social rejection, 75% of participants gave obviously wrong answers just to fit in. A frightened mind doesn't need chains. It builds its own cage. The control isn't external anymore. It lives inside you. And nowhere is this internal prison more visible than in how fear shapes your economic behavior. Economic terror. Have you ever stayed in a job you hated because you were terrified of losing your income? Have you ever avoided taking a risk? Starting a business, changing careers, pursuing a dream, because the fear of failure paralyzed you? That's not weakness, that's engineering. The economic system is designed to keep you in a constant state of financial anxiety. Noam Chomsky called this the manufacture of insecurity. If workers feel secure, they demand better conditions, higher pay, more freedom. But if they're terrified of losing everything, they stay quiet, they comply, they accept whatever they're given. You become grateful for your own exploitation. Psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs explains why this works so perfectly. When your survival needs feel threatened, food, shelter, security, you can't access higher cognitive functions like creativity, self-actualization, or critical thinking. Financial fear keeps you trapped at the bottom of the pyramid. You're too busy surviving to question the system, too anxious to rebel, too exhausted to think. As the great George Orwell wrote, the essence of oligarchical rule is not father-to-son inheritance, but the persistence of a certain worldview and a certain way of life. And that worldview is maintained through fear. But economic fear is only one layer. There's a deeper, more primal fear that controls everything. Death as weapon. Every system of control ultimately traces back to one primal fear, the fear of death. Terror management theory, developed by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Piszczynski, reveals something profound about human behavior. When people are reminded of their own mortality, they become dramatically more conformist, more nationalistic, and more aggressive toward outsiders. Mortality. In their experiments, simply asking participants to think about their own death caused measurable changes in behavior. They clung harder to their cultural worldview. They judged outsiders more harshly. They became more obedient to authority. Death, fear, control. This is why political leaders invoke death constantly. War on terror, fight against the deadly virus, the existential threat of the enemy. Every crisis is framed as life or death, because that framing triggers your deepest survival instincts. Remind someone they will die, and they will follow anyone who promises safety. As existentialist philosopher Soren Kierkegaard understood, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. When death anxiety is activated, freedom becomes terrifying, and terrified people don't want freedom, they want a savior. But what if the savior is the same person who created the fear in the first place? The fear cycle. This is where the entire system reveals itself. It operates in a predictable, repeating cycle that has been used by every authoritarian power structure in recorded history. 1. Create or amplify a threat. 2. Trigger mass fear response. 3. Offer protection in exchange for freedom. 4. Consolidate power while population is compliant. 5. Repeat with a new threat. Think about how many times you've seen this pattern in your lifetime. A crisis emerges, fear spreads, new laws are passed, freedoms are surrendered, and somehow the crisis never fully resolves, because resolution would mean losing the control mechanism. The emergency never ends because it was never meant to. Naomi Klein documented this brilliantly in her research on what she calls the shock doctrine. The way governments use moments of collective trauma to push through policies that would normally face massive resistance. In moments of crisis, people are willing to hand over a great deal of power to anyone who claims to have a magic cure. When you're drowning, you'll grab any hand that reaches for you. You won't ask whose hand it is or what they want in return. Crisis, surrender, control. But here's the question that matters most. Can you break free from this cycle? The answer begins with understanding something counterintuitive. Courage biology. Here's what they don't want you to know. Fear is not your default state. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's a trainable neurological skill. Neuroscientist Gregory Burns' research at Emory University showed that people who actively confront their fears develop stronger connections between their prefrontal cortex and amygdala. In other words, facing fear literally rewires your brain to be less controllable. Every time you face a fear, you weaken its grip on your mind. The Stoic philosophers understood this 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled during plague, war, and political chaos, wrote extensively about mastering fear. As he recorded in his private journal, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most evidence-based treatments in modern psychology, works on exactly this principle. Systematic exposure to feared stimuli reduces the amygdala's response over time. Face fear, grow free. You can literally train your brain to be resistant to manipulation, but it requires one crucial shift in perspective, and that's where everything comes together. Reclaim your mind. The shift is this, moving from unconscious reaction to conscious response. Every technique of fear-based control relies on one thing, your automatic, unexamined reaction. The moment you pause between stimulus and response, the entire system breaks down. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered this truth in the most extreme conditions imaginable. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our freedom and our power to choose our response. Awareness, that space, that tiny gap between the fear signal and your reaction, is where your freedom lives. Here's how to access it. First, become a conscious consumer of information. Every time you feel a surge of fear from a headline, pause. Ask yourself, who benefits from me being afraid right now? Question every fear that was given to you by someone else. Second, practice somatic awareness. Fear lives in your body before it reaches your mind. Notice the tightness in your chest, the shortening of breath. By observing the physical sensation, you activate your prefrontal cortex and weaken the amygdala's grip. Third, seek out diverse perspectives. Echo chambers amplify fear. Exposure to different viewpoints builds cognitive resilience. A mind that questions cannot be controlled. The controllers need you asleep. They need you reactive. They need you afraid. Your greatest act of rebellion is to think clearly. Everything we've explored today leads to one inescapable conclusion. Fear is not just an emotion, it's a technology that has been refined, weaponized, and deployed against you for centuries. From the amygdala hijack that shuts down your thinking, to the manufactured panics that keep you compliant, to the economic anxiety that traps you at the base of Maslow's pyramid. Every layer is designed to keep you in survival mode. Fear is a tool, but here's what the controllers never anticipated. Knowledge is the antidote to fear. The moment you understand how you're being manipulated, the manipulation loses its power. You cannot unsee what you've seen today. Every fear-driven headline, every crisis narrative, every attempt to make you hate your neighbor. You'll now recognize the pattern, and recognition is the first step toward liberation. A population that thinks clearly is a population that cannot be controlled. If you made it this far, comment "Fear Decoded" if you're ready to reclaim your mind from the psychology of terror. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this opened your eyes, hit like and subscribe. Understanding yourself is the work of a lifetime. See you in the next video.